All right. I thought the third part was going to be our final part, but we're going to do a little short extended fourth part, which actually kind of references your 3-part series that turned into 4 books. So
Yes,
it kind of makes
it did.
sense.
Might as well wrap it up that way, huh?
Yeah, my trilogy became a trilogy in 4 parts.
The trilogy
Yeah.
plus 1, yeah.
So I wanted to ask you, Ralph, about the Holy Grail and how it's relating with the Ark of the Covenant.
Yeah, interesting topic, that one. I've been chasing the Holy Grail, as many people have, I suppose, all the way through my books, and I didn't really find out what the Holy Grail was until I did the 4th of the King Jesus trilogy. That was the one on Arthurian legend, and of course Arthurian legend talks about the Holy Grail quite a lot. So how shall we introduce this? The Holy Grail is a multifaceted item, and it comes not just out of Arthurian history, it comes out of ancient history. Jesus and the disciples had the Holy Grail as well. How can we introduce this without giving it away?
Well, I'm used to the Holy Grail being presented as either the idea of it's a chalice, a cup, or it represents some sort of fertility and continuation of the bloodline.
Yes, we have that from Arthurian history. Excuse me.
San Grail, is there any reference to that in what you're going to talk about?
Yes, so that dualism between the San Grail and the San Grail, that comes out of Arthurian legend, so it's actually quite ancient. So it can mean either the Holy Grail, the Holy Cup, or the royal blood. And we have this illusion quite clearly. I'm going to have to cough just 1 minute. Hold on.
You've been going for a long time, Mr. Ellis. So
yeah,
I appreciate your super trooper.
A few hours, yeah. Yeah, that illusion comes straight out of Arthurian legend because it mentions the Holy Grail quite a lot. And the Holy Grail comes out at the round table. So they have this round table meeting, which is a big celebration. And the Holy Grail is paraded at the round table, which is surrounded by all of the knights, of course. And the knights of the round table are the same as the 12 disciples of Jesus. It's the same. Not sure if your readers will be, listeners will be familiar with that. There were 3 tables that were made. The first round table was the Last Supper table of Jesus. So the Last Supper table of Jesus was a round table surrounded by 12 disciples. The second was the round table of Joseph of Arimathea, who was surrounded by his 12 disciples. And the third was the round table of King Arthur, surrounded by his 12 knights. So that the 12 disciples of Jesus and the 12 knights of Arthur are exactly the same. The Last Supper table and the round table are exactly the same. They were supposed to be copies of each other. So we have this round table, we have this celebration, we have the presentation of the Grail. And we know that this is to do with, as you were saying, with fertility and the bloodline, because Firefits comes out. Firefits is one of the new knights, and he's being initiated into the knights of the round table. And the knights say to Firefits, "Can you see the Grail?" And he says, he's looking around, you know, and he's saying, "No, all I can see is this beautiful princess with a green cloth on her hand." And of course, all of the other knights are falling around laughing, you know, having fun. Because of course he can see the Grail, he just doesn't know what the Grail is. And so how can you see something unless you know what it is? The Grail was the princess. Of course he could see the Grail. He just didn't know what he was looking for. The Grail was the princess herself. She was the bloodline. The Grail was her womb. She was the one who would pass on the Grail to the next generation. So that's the little bit of fun they have in Arthurian legend. But it has another manifestation because it's a real object. And so we have this from Parsifal, which is by Wolfram von Eschenbach. And he says that the Grail is actually a stone, a sacred stone, a sacred meteorite. And so now we get the full aspects of the Grail. So in essence, it's a stone, a sacred stone.
Now, would that be separate from the Stone of Destiny?
It could well be the same, and we'll come to that in a minute. It needs 12 knights to protect it. So we have the Knights of the Round Table who are sworn to protect the Grail. And we need a bloodline to look after it, hence the princess. So it's a bloodline, it's a knighthood, it's a sacred stone itself. And then we have to look at where the stone came from and where it went to. So the first records we have of the sacred stone are from Egypt, where it was known as the Benben stone. And it was used as a pyramidion on the top of an obelisk in Heliopolis in Egypt. So it goes back into ancient history. So if you see any of the obelisks today, when they have that pyramidal top on the obelisk, that's sort of like a copy of the Benben stone. And from there, it goes into biblical history, because it was, and it's quite well accepted, I think, that the Benben stone was the pillow stone of Jacob. So Jacob has what do they call it? They call it the pillow stone, I think, in the English translation.
I don't recall the stone.
But in the original, yeah, I think they call it the pillow stone, but in the original Aramaic, it's called a mastaba. And of course, if you go to Egypt today, you'll know that a mastaba is a small pyramid. So now we know what, the stone of Jacob was. It was a small pyramid, which he used to pour oil on, the same as they do in India today. And from there, it seems to have gone up into Greece, because in Greece, we have this, again, same sort of pyramidal stone. We have the Omphalos stone of Delphi, which is not straight pyramidal now. It's more of a conical stone. And it was covered in some sort of netting. And we have various images of this. We have a copy that's in Delphi now. If you go to Delphi, you'll see the Omphalos of Delphi. But that's just a marble copy. It's not the original. But we have it on their coinage. So we have a number of coins from Greece that show exactly what the stone was. And it was a conical stone, small enough that you can sit on it. Well, we think so, because the person sitting on it is normally Apollo. So we have a god sitting on the stone. And again, it's covered in its netting. So we have this sacred Omphalos stone. And this Omphalos stone goes to Parthia. So it's going on quite a journey, this stone. And it probably goes to Parthia with the campaigns of Alexander the Great. If you're going on a campaign, you might want a sacred stone to come with you. I don't know. But anyway, we end up with all of these coins in Parthia, Persia, with the Omphalos stone on it. So we know this would be from the 3rd century BC. It ends up in Parthia. And then it goes back and ends up in Edessa. So we have coins in Edessa with the Omphalos. And this would be sort of 1st century, 2nd century AD. And how did it get back to Edessa? Well, I think the obvious route is it went back to Edessa via Queen Theomusa Aurania that we've been talking about, the queen that came out of Parthia and sent up a new sort of city-state in northern Syria. And she probably took the stone with her, and it ended up in Edessa. And the interesting thing about the Edessan stone, again, we have it on their coinage, so we've got images of it, is it's in a Bethel. And a lot of people say a Bethel is a stone itself, but I don't think it is. A Bethel is a house of God in the Aramaic. And I think what it's referring to is the container that it's in. Because if you look at the images from Edessa, it's inside the Ark of the Covenant. What they have is a little box with feet on the bottom of it. And that's known as the Edessan omphalos. And it's definitely a small wooden box. It's the Ark of the Covenant. So in the 1st and 2nd centuries AD, the Ark of the Covenant was in Edessa. It's probably one of the reasons why they were thought to be so powerful. If they actually had the Ark of the Covenant and the stones, remember, inside the Ark of the Covenant was supposed to be the sacred stones. And so again, we can link those sacred stones with the omphalos. That might have been part of the reason why they were so so influential and powerful. And do remember that the primary disciple of Jesus was called Simon.
Peter the Rock.
He was given the title Peter.
Cephas.
Cephas, yeah, meaning
Cephas.
the stone.
I thought
he was
Cephas,
the keeper.
Okay, Cephas.
He was the keeper of the stone. And so what stone was he keeping? Why did he get this name? Well, it wasn't just the rock upon which the church was founded. He was the keeper of the sacred stone. And this sacred stone has been around a lot of places for a long time. And that, again, is part of the reason Jesus was such an influential character, because he had the Holy Grail. From there, it ends up in Syria again. So just very slightly further south from Edessa, it ends up in Syria, in Emesa. And we have several coins of the subsequent generations. So we're talking about 2nd century AD, 3rd century AD, of this coin in Syria. And again, it's sitting in a small temple, and you've got this small conical stone sitting in there. And it's known now as the Elagabal. And the Elagabal, you'll see various translations of this, and I think they've all got the translations wrong. The Elagabal, Gabal means mountain, El is God. It's a mountain of God. And of course it is. If you look at it, it's a small hill, small mountain. It's just not very big. It's only about 2 foot high. It's quite small. And so they call it the Elagabal. And again, it's the sacred stone of Syria. And then it gets a bit of promotion, because we then get a Syrian monarchy, as it were, a Syrian emperors of Rome. So starting with Septimus Severus, I think it was, we then get emperors of Rome who came from Syria, which is where this stone is. And then the 3rd or 4th of those emperors was called Elagabalus, because he was the high priest of the Elagabal sacred stone. And he became emperor of Rome, and he's known as Emperor Elagabalus. And he was a bit crazy. Well, he wasn't crazy, because he was the priest of the Elagabal. And we've got to have a slight deviation here, because the priests of the Elagabal had to be eunuchs, so they had to be castrated. And so Elagabalus castrated himself. He was well known for his castration. And this element of castration is interesting, because it fits in with the gospel story again. These castratees, the priests of the Elagabal stone, were known as the Gali. That was their official title. And that's created lots of confusion ever since, because it gets translated in Arthurian legend into being Welsh, because Wales was called Galles at the time. But the Galles were the high priests of the Elagabal stone. Josephus Flavius calls them the Galileans. So he calls them the Galileans. And I wonder if I've got, because I wasn't prepared for this particular quote, I wonder if we can just get this quote from Josephus Flavius, if you don't mind me just
go
looking
ahead.
this up.
And I was also curious, what makes the stone so sacred?
Ah, well, because it fell from heaven. So this is a stone in Parsifal. It's known as the Lapsic Elixis, the stone that fell from heaven. And it was a meteorite. And so effectively, it was a piece of the sun that had broken off and fallen to earth. And of course, if you're effectively a sun worshipper, which most of the ancient religions were, you were worshipping the movement of the cosmos. If you have a piece of the sun that fell to earth as the phoenix, because that's where the phoenix come from, it's that fiery bird that streaks through the night sky with a thunderous clap that came down from the heavens. And you actually find this rock sitting in the ground somewhere, still steaming in this big hole in the ground. That's, you know, it's a piece of the cosmos has just broken off and just come to earth. And that's what they were worshipping. And that's why it was sacred. So, yeah, that's.
So this is also part of why we see a lot of the sun worship in the astro-theology and symbols. And
all of the ancient religions were originally to do with the cosmos.
Yeah, like Osiris, Ra, you go into like Mithra. There's so many different.
It's
that was the other thing that BBC documentary I was telling you, it mentions the story of Isis and Jesus in India. It kind of talks about a lot of the different religions, whether pagan or whatever, that incorporated the sun god, and it's very fascinating.
Yeah, it is.
Especially when you're raised as a traditional Christian in a modern day, and you're taught one thing, and you're trying to shed some of those beliefs so that you can have a better understanding of some of the things that are actually taking place, because we get blinded by things when we think that something is absolute.
I'm still trying to search through my.
I can only imagine how much stuff you got.
Yeah. I sometimes forget which book it's in sometimes, you know. I know it's here somewhere.
So I remember you mentioning that of the princess when she was feeding the Knights of the Round Table, that was actually had a different meaning other than not eating, but feeding meant something else.
Say that again. I was
when the Knights of the Round Table, when the princess was feeding them through the Holy Grail, it wasn't that they were feeding; she was feeding.
Oh, yeah, that comes from the New Testament. It comes from a quote from Jesus, where he is saying that bread is basically knowledge. So there is a Greek woman who is wanting a blessing from Jesus, and he sends her away, and she comes back, and she's being very insistent, and he said it's not right for the it is not right to give the bread of the children of Israel to dogs. So Jesus is calling the Greek woman a dog because she's a Gentile, she's a Goyim, she's not a Jew, and he says that she can't have the bread. And the bread obviously is the initiation, it's the knowledge, it's the wisdom of the Church of Jesus and James. And so, yes, these words can have different meanings sometimes. So when we come across bread, quite often we're talking about something other than bread. And same with, here we go. I've found my little quotes from the galley. So remembering that Jesus was a Galilean, it says in the New Testament that Jesus was a Galilean. And but we know all about these Galli. We get the first quote from Lucian, and Lucian says, "On these days the Galli are made. When the rest of them are playing flutes and performing rites, a frenzy comes upon many, and he throws off his clothes and takes up the sword and castrates himself. And then he rushes through the city holding in his hands his testicles, and he takes female clothing and woman's adornment from whatever house he throws the testicles into." So that's how you make a Galli high priest, who is the high priest of the Elagabal stone. And that's what Emperor Elagabalus did as well. That's why the Romans hated him, because he castrated himself.
It's kind of ironic you cut off your stones to protect the stone.
yeah. Well, there is a history behind this, but anyway. But then Josephus Flavius, you know, him who knows everything from the 1st century AD, except that he never mentions Jesus, and that's why you've got to look for, you know, how he mentions Jesus properly. Anyway, yep. Jesus was a Galilean, and Josephus Flavius says of these Galileans, who we've just sort of intimated are eunuchs, he says, "These Galileans indulged themselves in feminine wantonness. They decked their hair and put on women's garments and smeared with ointments that they might appear very comely. They had paints under their eyes and intimated not only the ornaments, but also the lusts of women. But while their faces looked like faces of women, they killed with their right hands. And while their gait was effeminate, they attacked men and became warriors and drew their swords from under their finely dyed dresses and ran everybody through whom they alighted upon."
It's pretty interesting.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Like, almost like transvestites in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. They dressed up the same as the Hijra do in India today. If you see the Indian Hijra, they're all castratees who dress up as women. So Jesus did. Yeah, Jesus and his disciples did exactly the same, which is why Jesus asked his disciples to become eunuchs. And you probably don't know that either, because the priest won't tell you this.
But you referenced that you referenced that, and it's actually something that's in Scripture. It's just kind of taken out a weird way.
Yeah, I mean, it's a verse from Scripture. It says, Jesus said to his disciples, "Some eunuchs were born from their mother's womb, and some eunuchs were made eunuchs by men. And there are also eunuchs who have made themselves eunuchs for the kingdom of heaven's sake. He that is able to receive it, let him receive it." Matthew 19:12. What he's saying there to his disciples is, if you can become a high priest, a Galilean, then you should do so. If you can make yourself a eunuch, if you can cut off your testicles and throw them through the roof, through the window of a house, and take their women's clothing, as Lucian said, just as Josephus Flavius said. Once you dress as a woman, as a eunuch, then you can become the high priest of the Elagabal stone. And you might think, oh, this is all a bit, it's got nothing to do with Christianity. It's all a bit strange. You know, we can't be talking about this, which is why the priesthood don't talk about this. But then you go to, and of course the dresses they wore were red, because it was Sir Galahad was one of the Galileans. That's why he's called Galahad. And Galahad was the Red Knight. So we know the dresses that they wore were red dresses. Yeah, poor old Sir Galahad was a castrated knight who dressed up as a woman.
Beautiful.
But just to finish this off, you might think this is all very strange, nothing to do with Christianity, but then you go down to Rome and to the Vatican, and you watch them all come into the Vatican, and of course all the bishops are dressed in red dresses, exactly the same as the Gali high priests.
Interesting.
Yeah, they still wear the same uniform today. They all wear red dresses, and they are all sort of pseudo eunuchs. They're not allowed to marry, just the same as they were in the time of Jesus.
Well, Ralph, I think you just probably really blew the lid off a lot of people's heads. But I do have two questions, but I do have two final questions that are going to do the same thing. And I want to make them short, so in respect of our time, because we're already running along now. But the crown of thorns, in just one short answer, what that really is, so the listeners can kind of get one more lid blown off.
Jesus was crucified while wearing a crown of thorns and a purple cloak. And of course, the traditional crown of the Edessan kings was a crown of thorns. And it doesn't look like what you're supposed to think it looks like. It is a proper regal crown with thorns all over the top of it. We don't quite know what the thorns are, what they were made of and what they were supposed to represent, but they're certainly, if you look at it, it's a crown of thorns.
And had tassels on it, like on the back end. It signified royalty as well.
Back. Yeah, which was traditional for the for the kings of Judea. They had the same crowns. I think it was Aaron was given the same crown with the same tassels on the back. And the purple cloak was the symbol of the emperor. This is why we know that this was a battle for the throne of Rome. So when Jesus started the Jewish revolt, we didn't actually finish this, did we? Why on earth did Jesus start this Jesus character, the king of Edessa? Why did he start the Jewish revolt with Rome? It's because the throne of Rome was pretty much empty at that time. It was because Emperor Nero was a dead man walking in AD 66, and everybody knew it. Everyone knew the throne was going to be empty in a couple of years, and it was. Nero died. He committed suicide in AD 68. The throne of Rome was empty to whoever could grab it. And in Rome, there was no such thing as an election, and at that time there was no inheritance. There was no inheritance for it to go to after Nero. And so everyone who could put their army into the field could take the throne of Rome. And so we had 4 emperors came and went in 1 year. It was the year of 4 emperors, where everybody was out to become the next emperor of Rome. But what they won't tell you is it was actually the year of 5 emperors. And the 5th emperor who put his crown into the ring was this Jesus Esus, the king of Edessa. And that's the reason he took over Judea, because if he could take over the Roman East, then that was the most powerful part of the Roman Empire. If he could take over the Roman East, he could then march on Rome with his army and become the next emperor of Rome. And that's why when it failed, he was given this purple cloak to wear, because the purple cloak was the symbol of the emperor of Rome. So we know that Jesus was a pretender to the throne of Rome. Otherwise, he would not have been given a purple cloak to wear. And of course, at the end of the Jewish revolt, it was King Esus against Vespasian. King Esus lost and was exiled. Vespasian went back to Rome to become the next emperor. So that battle in Judea for the Jewish revolt was nothing to do with Judea per se. It was actually a battle for the throne of Rome, who was going to become the next emperor. If King Esus had won, he would have gone to Rome, but he lost, and so it was Vespasian who went to Rome and became the next emperor. So that's why Jesus was crucified while wearing a purple cloak.
Interesting. And so people, if the listeners want to check, you can actually look up, there's a coin that actually has the crown of thorns. Yep. You can see that.
Well, we'll include links down below for your YouTube channel, Ralph, because in your lectures, you kind of go over a lot of this information, and then people can verify. You show pictures of like statues of people to compare likeness. You show a lot of things that people can definitely find value from if they're enjoying what we're talking about here, because it's fascinating.
Yeah. All right. So one last and final question, if you want to answer it in one word, and then we can continue on, maybe possibly in another interview after. Where was Jesus buried?
Oh, interesting. My speculation, and again, this comes from Arthurian legend, because Arthurian legend writes all about this, but we'll have to go into the Arthurian story more in another in a another video. But reading from Arthurian legend and where Jesus was in England, it appears to me that he was buried in Stonehenge.
Boom.
Okay. Cool.
It.
So that leaves it's a good place to leave things off of. If you stuck around all the way through and you're watching this right now and you've watched all the parts, you are a super trooper like all of us. And I appreciate you guys watching. Make sure you subscribe to both me and Stan's channel. Make sure you check out Ralph's channel and subscribe to him. You can actually just kind of put Ralph Ellis's name in YouTube search bar and you'll see all types of different collaborations and conversations he's done with a plethora of people. So it's been a long conversation, and I'm definitely I've enjoyed it, but I'm ready to move around a little bit. I haven't sat this still for so long. It's I'm 45 and I feel like a 10-year-old needs to run around the house right now. So I really appreciate you guys' time. Ralph, I'll be in touch so we can do a follow-up in some capacity. So I really appreciate it, man. Any final thoughts you want to leave with?
No, that's fine. Thanks, Stan. Thanks, Rice, for the interview. Just a quick plug for the books. So the books we've been discussing were Cleopatra to Christ, King Jesus, Jesus, King of Edessa, and then the Grail Cypher. So those are the books. They're all out there on Amazon. You'll put links up, I'm sure, to my website and things like that.
We didn't mention this to you, Ralph. We actually brought you up specifically in one of our episodes talking about Greg Hallett, and we already shared some of the information. So not that we told people that we were going to reach out to you and try to make the connection, but your information has already been on both of our channels, and we've already kind of discussed this a little bit. So we'll definitely include links, man. I want to make sure that people are aware of your stuff, and people that want to be able to get your books, we're going to make sure that they're going to have access to the information to be able to get your books, man.
Yeah, that's great. And there's a lot more to talk about as well. We've only sort of scratched the surface, you know.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh, really? That's crazy. I know, that's crazy. We've only scratched the surface, so it's
after 4 hours.
Yeah. Don't forget to give him the link to the other wiki so we can get his information out there.
Yeah, Ralph, now that I got your email and stuff like that, I'll send you some information. I know the people behind Everypedia, so we can at least get something set up to where we can.
Oh, yeah, that would be a good idea. Yes.
Have your information put up there, which would be great. So once again, man, I really appreciate your time. Stan, it's been great. I'm going to go ahead.
Excellent. Thanks, Ralph.
Stop recording. Thank you again, ladies and gentlemen.